They are the most extreme killers in the annals of crime.
He made soup bowls from the skulls, shade pulls from human lips. He made a belt out of female nipples.
No predator is as depraved or bloodthirsty.
For someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, who received such gratification that he continued to do it over and over and over again, and likely would have done it forever.
They are driven by the darkest impulses and willing to destroy life to satisfy their compulsions.
There were certain necrophiliac sex killers who would murder victims and keep their corpses to perform sexual acts on until the corpses had reached an advanced state of decomposition.
These cold-blooded monsters are disconnected from reality, resorting to unspeakable acts to obey delusional orders.
His neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon and instructing him to go out and kill people.
What causes such a murderous defect in the human psyche?
Every now and then, a killer will come along whose crimes seem so monstrous that they seem like these supernatural creatures.
Now, the voices and visions of serial killers.
I'm not quite sure when I strike again.
Take us deep inside their complex and twisted minds.
Police in Milwaukee, Wisconsin are examining some macabre evidence of mass murder. Parts of human bodies have been found in a flat in one of the city's slums, an acid bath containing human remains, and photographs of dismembered corpses.
July 22nd, 1991. Milwaukee police raid the apartment of 31-year-old Jeffrey Dahmer.
Police think they may be the remains of 15 victims of yet another so-called serial killer.
Jeffrey Dahmer is the now infamous serial killer known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. From 1978 to 1991, he follows a terrifying pattern of picking up, charming, raping, and murdering young men. Dahmer's first kill comes in 1978. He picks up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. After some beers, they have sex. But when Hicks wants to leave, Dahmer smashes his skull with a barbell. He then dismembers the corpse and stores the remains in the crawl space under his house. Killing is not enough for Dahmer. His crimes extend to necrophilia, dismemberment, and even cannibalism. He keeps skulls and body parts as trophies in his house. His ultimate plan is to build a shrine with the bones of his victims.
For someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, who not only killed but cannibalized his victims, he received such gratification from that he continued to do it over and over and over again, and likely would have done it forever until he had been caught.
Crime reporter Annie Schwartz writes a book about the murders, and she vividly describes what police find at the crime scene.
The crowd parted to make way for Milwaukee County Medical Examiner Jeffrey Jensen's white station wagon. In the apartment, Jensen went on about the business of rounding up the various body parts. He took the 3 plastic bags containing human heads found in the top freezer portion of the refrigerator and put them in another freezer. Dahmer had a separate waist-high freezer in addition to the one that connected to the refrigerator. Jensen then took the head Mueller had seen in the refrigerator and put it in the separate freezer with the 3 heads. He noted that next to the head in the refrigerator was an open box of baking soda and some ketchup and mustard.
As his killing progresses, Dahmer attempts to create obedient zombies by drilling holes in victims' heads and pouring in caustic chemicals. The escape of a potential victim eventually leads to the apprehension of Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer confesses to killing 17 men, but he pleads not guilty on the grounds of insanity. He claims to be psychotic.
A psychotic serial killer is somebody who's suffering from psychosis, which is a break from reality and having a lack of understanding what's real or unreal, and yet being able to commit these serial murders despite their psychosis. There are several manifestations of psychosis, such as having thought disturbances, hallucinations, or even just not understanding that what they're doing is occurring in the real world. They may think that they are told to do something, let's say kill someone, because they're hearing voices, or they may see something that's not there and choose to act upon it or kill someone because of it.
Snap, a break from reality, a loss of understanding and perspective as to right and wrong, being driven by a passion that one cannot control, a psychotic break. So for that instant, when this individual engaged in behavior, he lost complete control of what he was doing.
It's common for serial killers to claim to be psychotic. It's often an attempt to escape the death penalty or serve their sentence in a mental hospital instead of a prison.
From a legal standpoint, we get into the area of competency. And what that means in a court of law is whether or not someone understands and appreciates what they did, and most importantly, whether they knew it was wrong. And that's a decision that oftentimes is made by a judge.
After a 19-day trial, the jury returns the verdict. Jeffrey Dahmer is found to be legally sane and therefore guilty. He receives 16 life sentences, but is beaten to death in prison by a fellow inmate in 1994. So was Dahmer able to understand right from wrong? He carried on what seemed to be a normal life.
I don't think that any of us really knew how big this story was. When I got the phone call, all I was told was that some officers had found a head in a refrigerator, and that he had obviously been killing men and kept some of their body parts. That's all I knew. And I got all the way out there and there was nothing there. It was really quiet. I asked a couple of the cops that were there, what was going on, and they just shook their heads. And eventually I was told that, that was what was happening. I went back around the front of the building and was allowed in by one of the residents. I ran upstairs and got in the apartment. Everyone always wants to know if, what it looked like, and it doesn't look like a dungeon, it doesn't look like a chamber of horrors, it looks like a regular guy's apartment.
Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer, someone who for an extended period of time creates a fantasy world in which they are enjoying themselves. They are thriving in that fantasy world, still very often able to function in normal society as a regular person. They live in reality, then they exit reality and enter this world that they've created, which could be driven by so many different factors: sexual frustration, cannibalism, pornography, things of that nature.
There are some individuals who are psychotic in nature, who are being told by a voice outside of themselves to go and kill somebody, but they may be, again, engaging in that act to fulfill that fantasy, whatever that fantasy is, of how to strangulate the person or how to hang them from a beam in the basement while they watch. And they may exact pleasure from that, both sexual pleasure and gratification, that they are able to control the life of somebody, which gives them an immense amount of power. That I have the power to control whether you live or die, and they will watch them die.
Are these monsters crazy, or is there a clear motive, like a sexual craving or a need for power and control? The question of whether these extreme killers are legally sane is a long-standing debate.
I think that what you'll often see is there's basically, at least in New York, a litmus test for people as far as the psychology of a murderer. And basically what that is does the person know that he's doing something wrong? And he could be talking to the moon. He may seem to think that he's a Martian or Napoleon Bonaparte, but if he kills somebody and then he lies about it, and then he hides the murder weapon, and he conceals the blood, and he bleaches the floor, he knew what he did is wrong. So that's our litmus test.
Sex and torture are common elements of serial murders. But with psychotic killers, these components are not always involved. Like in the gruesome case of Ed Gein. It was a crime that shocked the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, and the country. Edward Gein, accused of killing a woman, then gutting her body like a slaughtered deer. Ed Gein executes his victims swiftly, without torture or sexual contact. He eventually confesses to 2 murders, but it's unknown just how many people he kills. These crimes originate from an unfathomable darkness, a depravity that earns him the name the Ghoul of Plainfield.
There are all kinds of horrific crimes that take place, but there are just a few killers that come along periodically whose crimes seem so monstrous that they seem like these supernatural creatures. Ed Gein was a necrophiliac serial killer who lived and operated in Wisconsin in the 1950s.
The repugnant nature of his crimes horrify and shock puritanical America in the 1950s, and truly leaves the small town of less than 700 residents with more questions than answers.
Gein would read the newspapers, the obituary section, and whenever some middle-aged or elderly woman had died and got buried, he would make these midnight raids on the cemetery. He would dig up the bodies of these women, bring the corpses back to his farmhouse, dissect them, make different kinds of household objects out of the body parts. He made soup bowls from the skulls. He made shade pulls from human lips. He made a belt out of female nipples. He would upholster chairs out of their flesh. But very, very notoriously, he flayed the corpses and fashioned them into a skin suit, and he would dress up in this skin suit and pretend to be his own mother.
A recurring theme in the psychology of serial killers is a deeply dysfunctional childhood. Ed Gein's father was an alcoholic and often absent, so Gein was isolated with his domineering and devoutly religious mother. She preached to her boys about the innate immorality of the world and her belief that all women were naturally promiscuous.
Ed Gein was interesting also insofar as he had a pathological attachment as a schizophrenic young person to his mother. And when the mother died, it's then that he embarked on his career of doing these terrible things, as though he was now reattached to his mother. His mother hadn't really died, even though she was actually a very wicked person to him, and she was very cruel to him. But nevertheless, it was the only human tie that he had.
Ed Gein, who was this kind of bizarre, quasi-psychotic, inadequate personality trying to create this suit. But he was also, when analyzed by professionals, was also found to have distinct psychopathic features mixed in with the psychotic qualities.
Gein is apprehended after abducting and murdering Bernice Warden. He kidnapped her at the hardware store she owned. Her decapitated body is found in Gein's shed, with her torso dressed out like a deer. Gein later admits to making about 40 nocturnal visits to local graveyards in a daze-like state. In 1968, Edward Gein is found guilty of murder, but he's judged legally insane and is remanded to a psychiatric institution where he dies in 1984. Gein's heinous crimes leave a permanent scar on the American psyche. The sensational nature of his acts also fuels a morbid fascination that spawns many books and movies.
Ed Gein, who was the inspiration not only for Norman Bates and Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but also the character Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. One thing that fascinated me when I first began to write about people like Ed Gein was how their stories are immediately turned into different kinds of folk tales and myths. They become these undying, immortal monsters in our collective psyche.
Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein's horrific crimes shock their hometowns. But there is another extreme killer who terrifies an entire nation. Psychotic killers have gone down as some of the most infamous and depraved murderers in the history of crime. Their homicides have included despicable acts like dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism. But contrary to popular myth, serial killers genuinely influenced by psychotic visions are extremely rare.
I think one of the most important myths for us to explode is the idea that people who commit serial murder must all be quote-unquote crazy or evil, from dusk till dawn, all day long committing evil acts. The reality is that very few of these individuals are actually going to meet criteria for serious mental illness, such as psychosis or mania.
Only a very small percentage of serial killers, less than 1%, are judged to be legally insane. Despite the rarity of psychotic serial killers, there have been notable cases. Serial killer Herbert Mullen was ruled insane when he murdered 10 people in the 1970s. Mullen hears voices emanating from his victims, convincing him the crimes are necessary to prevent catastrophic earthquakes in California. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento, is also a bona fide psychotic. He believes Nazis with ties to UFOs are attempting to turn his blood into powder. The antidote is drinking more blood. Chase often swallows an elixir of Coca-Cola and animal entrails and injects rabbit's blood into his own veins. In the late 1970s, Chase horribly slaughters 6 people, including a baby, and drinks his victim's blood.
Psychosis is certainly a serious mental disturbance. It's a genuine mental illness. This is the kind of mental illness where you might hear voices in your head, or there are delusional elements to what's going on, and you might believe that you have to do things. I mean, there's psychosis that might bring with it a certain degree of paranoia. Somebody's chasing me, or God's told me to go and kill a certain kind of class of persons.
More interesting question that people often ask is, are serial killers insane? It's important to recognize that sanity and insanity are not clinical terms, they're legal terms. So it's very, very difficult to prove that a serial killer, even though the acts he commits seem totally mad, is insane. Because the legal definition of sanity is you can tell the difference between right and wrong.
David Berkowitz, the son of Sam serial killer, launched a 13-month reign of terror in New York City beginning in July 1976. Berkowitz used a .44 caliber pistol to kill 6 people and wound 7 more in random attacks. His victims of choice appear to be young women with long dark hair. Donna Loria and Jody Valenti are shot while chatting in a car. Donna DeMasi and Joanne Lomino are victimized while sitting together on the stoop of a house. Berkowitz says the Sam in his nickname comes from his neighbor Sam Carr. He claims Sam is a high demon who transmits voice commands through his dog, ordering the murders.
I think that David Berkowitz is quite possibly a revenge-motivated serial killer. I am suspect about whether he really believed that Sam Carr's dog was demonic and speaking to him, and I suspect that he was gaining his satisfaction from taking revenge against women. This was a terribly lonely man. David Berkowitz worked in the post office on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. It's a huge, beautiful granite building. And here's this man who's alienated, doesn't have a girlfriend. He has this flood of mail that's coming through this building, a tidal wave of human connection. Birthday cards, Valentine's Day cards, love letters. All this human connection is flowing around him, and there he is alone. He's completely alone, and he quite possibly was very angry at all the beautiful women walking past him on the sidewalk on the Grand Concourse. He was going into lovers' lanes and shooting lovers. He was going after pretty women walking down the sidewalk. This has all the earmarks of someone taking revenge against that alienation, against that separation.
Raymond believes that, like many serial killers, Berkowitz was faking his psychosis.
If you see some of his statements, he was talking about his neighbor's dog was possessed by a demon and instructing him to go out and kill people. It would seem as if all of a sudden these demonic voices ceased upon his arrest and his incarceration, making it somewhat suspect that that's really what it was. I think that you'll often see with serial killers that they will make excuses for their murderous crimes. You'll see them blame it on something or somebody or an entity, make up an entity like Sam Carr's dog.
A lot of people would assume that they're all psychotic or crazy, but if you think about it, if you are mentally impaired, it's actually a lot more difficult to function, let alone commit these types of crimes, which leave a lot of evidence behind, which are very difficult to commit, and to be able to do it so often that you're able to gain serial killer status. So if you think about it, it's actually very difficult to be mentally impaired and commit these type of crimes. But that being said, psychopathy is very common among serial killers.
Psychopathy is a complex disorder that has been recognized for centuries.
They used to call it moral insanity. Back in the 19th century, again, when they had serial killers, and before they had the term psychopath, they were trying to figure out the psychology of these people, because these were people who were very rational and often very intelligent. They were not subject to delusions or hallucinations. They seemed just like you and me, except they had no morality, they had no conscience, they had no ability to empathize with other human beings. They saw other human beings merely as objects to be exploited and used for their own depraved pleasures.
In the 1880s, German psychiatrist Richard von Krafft-Ebing wrote the classic textbook, Psychopathia Sexualis.
And it is a very, very shocking book in many ways, because Krafft-Ebing is very, very graphic in his description of the kind of acts of the criminals he talks about. And again, some of them, even nowadays, are really beyond the pale. There were certain necrophiliac sex killers, for example, who would murder victims and keep their corpses with them to perform sexual acts on until the corpses had reached an advanced state of decomposition.
The book even describes the Jack the Ripper case while the crime is still fresh in the news. The bodies of women were found in various lonely quarters of London, ripped open and mutilated. It is probable that he first cut the throats of his victims, then ripped open the abdomen and groped among the intestines. In some instances, he cut off the genitals and carried them away. In others, he only tore them to pieces and left them behind. He does not seem to have had sexual intercourse with his victims, but very likely the murderous act and subsequent mutilation of the corpse were equivalents for the sexual act. The crimes of Jack the Ripper terrorized London. But a century after his heinous crimes, a new serial killer strikes fear throughout the nation. A maniac known as the Yorkshire Ripper. Many extreme serial killers perform unspeakable acts. A great challenge for investigators, psychiatrists, and the courts is to determine if these murderers are legally insane. To unlock this complex puzzle, they often look to the offenders' childhoods to determine how they became such monsters. Research shows that as children, they often suffered significant abuse, sometimes psychological, sometimes physical, often sexual. There was usually a long history of psychiatric problems, criminal behavior, and alcoholism within the family.
Often they might share disrupted or broken childhoods in the sense that their family lives, their socialization patterns are atypical, they're not common. Perhaps family breakdown, family violence, all those sorts of things.
Jeffrey Dahmer claims to have been sexually abused by his neighbor when he was 10 years old. His parents were constantly fighting and divorced when he was 17. Both his mother and father moved out, leaving Dahmer alone with his growing paranoia and terrible fantasies.
Clearly what's operating there is what we would tend to call these days a paraphilia. That kind of sexual preference may not emerge until the teens, early teens or late teens, and that's partly might be derived from experimentation and so on, and it might also produce different kinds of emotional reactions. So the teenage years, the years when we develop our kind of courtship and our sexual relationships with others, that can be a very disturbing period, and it can of course go awry.
Because of their extreme social isolation and general hatred of the world, they often profess to have felt suicidal as teenagers. They display a strong interest in deviant sexuality and are obsessed with violence, voyeurism, and pornography. Their fantasies drive their murderous acts.
What's interesting is, as you sort of carefully examine the lives of a lot of these serial sexual offenders, is that each crime seems to almost represent an attempt to live out the fantasy in a more and more perfect way. If they prowl until they find an individual that perfectly, fits the character. It's almost like working for central casting or something. We have to find someone who's just right appearance-wise. Sometimes they'll even alter the appearance of the individual with a wig or makeup or worse to make the individual look like the character they have in mind. But it's important to understand them imagining themselves almost like a director of a scene, where they're calling all the shots for once.
A century after Jack the Ripper terrorized London, a new serial killer strikes fear into the residents of England's northern counties. Peter Sutcliffe's homicidal rage lasts 5 years, claiming the lives of at least 13 women and wounding 7 more. He slaughters his victims with a hammer, chisel, screwdriver, and knives. The crimes earned Sutcliffe the nickname the Yorkshire Ripper.
Peter Sutcliffe was born in the northeast part of England in the York, Leeds area. He eventually ended up wanting to kill one prostitute after the other. He was often just at the edge of being captured, but they couldn't quite accumulate enough evidence in the pre-DNA days to certify that he was the person.
When Peter Sutcliffe is 20 years old, he works as a gravedigger in a cemetery. He claims he is driven to murder prostitutes by voices he hears emanating from tombstones. Sutcliffe is a quiet, pleasant, and handsome young man, and no one suspects he is capable of such heinous acts. Sutcliffe develops a loathing and at the same time a fascination with prostitutes. By now he is married and holds a good job as a long-haul truck driver. In 1975, he attempts 2 murders in July and August, but both women survive his hammer and knife attacks. But the voices drive him forward. In October, he successfully kills his first victim. 3 months later, he bludgeons a prostitute and stabs her 50 times. There's no schedule for Sutcliffe's murders. The next is 13 months later.
And as time goes on, what happens is that just like someone who's addicted to drugs, there's some evidence that biologically this may be literally true, that the same brain areas that subserve drug addiction might be at play in individuals who repeatedly commit homicide, become addicted to it. They need more and more of a fix, more and more power, more and more of a horrible crime to satisfy that need.
Sutcliffe butchers another prostitute 6 months later, but the police investigation gains little traction.
Obviously, the people that go to the prostitutes, the punters, as we call them, their clients, they are very, very reluctant to come forward indeed. We don't expect them to be coming forward cheerfully on occasions of this nature. And possibly the third aspect of it is that members of the public, because it's a prostitute, do not feel affected themselves. Had it been the murder of a young baby or a young girl, then I think we would have had far more people trying to volunteer information than we have because it's a murder of prostitutes.
But then his murders take a frightening turn. His next victim is not a prostitute. It's a 16-year-old schoolgirl. Now terror grips the North Counties. No woman is safe. Police go house to house, desperate for clues.
Hello, love. Hello. We're doing house-to-house inquiries regarding this murder that happened on Saturday night.
Yeah.
Do you mind answering a few questions, please?
Go ahead.
Have you seen these photographs in paper?
Yeah.
That's a young girl there. Oh, those are the clothes that she was wearing on Saturday night. Do you remember, were you out on Saturday, saw anyone like that?
No.
The Yorkshire Ripper continues on his murderous rage. West Yorkshire Chief Police Investigator George Oldfield is asked if he thinks the Ripper will strike again.
I think there's every possibility that he will. The big question is when and where. My fear every Sunday morning when the telephone rings is, are we in business again?
Citizens are in a panic. There are no concrete leads. Finally, in December 1977, the police get a lead that points to Peter Sutcliffe. But the Yorkshire Ripper slips through their grasp. Extreme serial killer Peter Sutcliffe is butchering young women at an alarming pace across England's North Counties. At first, it's only prostitutes, but now all women are in the crosshairs of this maniac murderer. Police search frantically, but they find no concrete clues. Until a brand new 5-pound note is found on one victim. It's traced to the salary payment made to Peter Sutcliffe. Sutcliffe's wife can't believe Peter is the killer, and she supplies an alibi. Within days of his police interview, there is another attack. But the victim survives, and a police sketch artist creates a very close likeness to Sutcliffe. The frenzy to catch the Ripper intensifies. Sutcliffe continues his trucking runs where he would sleep in the cab. Pinned up in one of his windows is a chilling note. It reads, "In this truck is a man whose latent genius, if unleashed, would rock the nation, whose dynamic energy would overpower those around him. Better let him sleep." During the first 5 months of 1978, there are 3 more victims. The public pressure to capture the killer is intense. George Oldfield and his team are desperate for leads. Then, in the spring, there are astounding developments, taunting letters from the Ripper that seem to be authentic. And 3 months later, a tape recording from the killer.
I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they? I should be in the bigger records. I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again. But it will be definitely sometime this year. Maybe September, October.
On September 2nd, 1979, another victim, seemingly verifying the warning on the tape. A huge publicity campaign is launched to enlist the support of the public to help catch the killer. A special newspaper is printed and delivered to over 1 million homes. And a tape is broadcast with a plea for assistance.
Over the past 4 years, 12 women have been horribly murdered and mutilated by a sick, sadistic maniac, the Yorkshire Ripper. How can we stop this madman from killing again? Here's one way. Listen.
I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again. But it will be definitely sometime this year.
Have you heard that voice before? At work, or in a pub, club, on a bus, or in a queue? Think. Do you know somebody with a northeastern accent like that, who lives in the Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, Preston, Halifax, or Huddersfield areas? Or who travels there from your area? If so, phone your local police.
The case now gains worldwide attention and leads pour into the police. More than 1 million man-hours are devoted to analyzing the clues. The pressure and immense workload leads to 8 divorces within the Ripper squad. Hundreds of wives report their own husbands as the Ripper. But in the end, it's determined that the letters and recording are a hoax. The Yorkshire Ripper remains on the loose. Police have spent thousands of hours chasing leads on the Yorkshire Ripper, only to discover the letters and tape recordings they're analyzing are just an elaborate hoax. Meanwhile, to help avoid capture, Sutcliffe decides to change his murder signature and starts to kill by strangulation with a rope. 2 more victims up the Yorkshire Ripper's death toll to 13, with 7 more brutally attacked. Then finally, on January 2nd, 1981, police find Sutcliffe parked with a prostitute. He slips behind some shrubbery, claiming he's urinating. He tries to hide his weapons, but on questioning, he's caught in several lies and arrested. At the police station, he faces intense interrogation, and he says, "You think I'm the Ripper, don't you?" Detective Sergeant Des O'Boyle says, "Well, what about it?" There's a long pause, then Sutcliffe says, "You're right. It's me." At his trial, Peter Sutcliffe is found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But shortly after his conviction, prison psychiatrists examine the killer and declare him legally insane. He's then transferred to Broadmoor Hospital to serve his sentence. Peter Sutcliffe's father never understands what drove his son, and he grieves for the victims and their families.
Our hearts go out to all the families of the victims, whoever they are, wherever they are. We must carry that burden, as well as Peter, for the rest of our lives. After all, he is my son, and I want every father in the country to be glad that it was my son and not theirs.
As a homicide detective, Malcolm Raymond specialized in sexual predator and serial killer cases. All too often, he was confronted with the gruesome results of extreme serial killers' madness.
Every crime scene speaks to you, so you have to examine a crime scene in great detail and look at the little details. The horror of the situation is something that you have to move past in order to get your job done. You're not a robot. You know, you do feel these things, and they're absolutely horrifying scenes. And I think that what happens is you'll think about it later. That'll come back to you later. When you're at the crime scene, you have a job to do, and it's a technical job, so you have to move past that. You have to grit your teeth and get past that, and then you deal with it on a personal or emotional level later on. And being at a crime scene is so much more intense. You can look at pictures or films, but when you smell it, when you get the smell in your hair and your suit, when you're stepping over brains and blood, trying not to get it on your shoes, when you're staring at a dead body and the lifeless eyes are looking back at you, it's a surreal life.
Raymond speaks for all police officers who track these murderers, describing the importance and the difficulty of apprehending these monsters and the satisfaction of finally bringing them to justice.
To get these cases solved, you have to be absolutely relentless. You can't give up. You have to remain focused. You have to be absolutely relentless. When you go down an avenue and it hits a dead end, you got to find another way around it. And you can't give up. You can't throw up your hands because it's up to you. Nobody's going to do it for you. You've got to do it.
How satisfying is it when you get it?
It's incredibly satisfying. It's God's work. You're giving justice to the dead. You're giving justice to that person's family, to their loved ones. And there's also another effect that a lot of people don't take into account. You're saving people who haven't been victimized yet, people who would have been killed had you not done your job.